Your average Joe doesn't have to reduce his carbon footprint and aid against climate change until big corporations and governments start trying. Pretty much, the average person's attempts to minimize their effect on climate change is a very valiant cause, but will do nothing in the long run until corporations and governments own up to their shortcomings and do something about it. Governments burning fossil fuels and corporations dumping trash into the oceans and not doing anything to reduce their carbon footprints is going to be the last straw for humans. If we continue like this, then climate change is, in my opinion, going to be the one that kills a majority of the population. The quote, "A chain is only as strong as its weakest link," really applies here. It's great that people do their bit in helping, but until governments and companies do something, the world will continue in the downward spiral that it's on. Until governments start use renewable energy instead of coal or corporations reduce their carbon footprint, you or I don't have to do anything because our small contribution won't really change anything. Yeah, a person taking a shorter shower and riding a bike is for a great cause and should be supported, but it means close to nothing. Big businesses and governments have to own up and need to make huge efforts to remedy climate change. Edit. So I see a lot of people saying that the average Joe's job is to vote for candidates that have a policy like that. I absolutely agree. You guys have actually changed my opinion a little, but I still think that it should be the government/potential candidate and corporations that take the initiative. I know that is a bit of wishful thinking because that's putting a lot of faith in people where this isn't a priority, but the initiative is really key here in my opinion. This isn't an unpopular opinion, this is stone cold fact. Corporations produce more pollutants and consume more resources than individual citizens by orders of magnitude. The belief that average people are responsible for pollution, waste, carbon output, etc., is the result of 3 decades of corporate propaganda pushing the blame off themselves. Why does it have to be either or? Sure, one person isn't going to mean shit, but there are 300+ million people in the United States, and all of them reducing carbon footprint would be greater than or equal to many large corporations, not to mention we're the reason most of them spew out carbon in the first place. Acting like it's not your responsibility because no one else is doing it is part of the problem. It's actually the average Joe, with his average actions, that will make the big corporations change for the better. Every time you give money to a brand, you are saying that you agree with everything they do. If you give money to Coca-Cola, you're saying they can continue to pollute the same way they do now, because customers will buy their product anyway. If you want a big corporation to change their behavior, change yours first. They will always follow the money. I see what you're saying, but there needs to be a line with this logic. My dad, in the UK, always says that there isn't much point the UK doing anything until the US and China start doing something. I feel like this is such a cop-out and almost deflects responsibility. If the top 20 polluting companies are asked to stop, then companies 15 to 20 could use the same logic that they don't have to, because if the top 14 companies don't, then there's no point. Yes, the big corporations do account for the overwhelming majority. Do I agree your average person should do nothing? No. I think they have their part to play too. Take down the cruise ship industry, but I mean, if the average Joe would choose the eco-friendly item over the not eco-friendly item, and many average Joes did that, wouldn't it push corporations to create eco-friendly items to sell to average Joes? Where I live, single-use plastic bags have been banned from supermarkets to aid in the fight against climate change. This has been one of the most misguided policies ever, as now people use reusable bags that, depending on materials and printing, have anywhere between 100 and 500 times the carbon footprint of the old single-use bags. And yet in these same supermarkets, I walk down the produce aisle and see fruit in netting, vegetables and herbs wrapped in plastic, while identical counterparts sit next to them, naked to the world and every bit as tasty. I have a bright idea. Firstly, legislate against needlessly wrapping produce. Secondly, cardboard is actually wonderfully recyclable. All the shit in the supermarket turns up in cardboard boxes. Put them out the store exit for people to pack their groceries in, and provide a recycling skip in the car park they can return their empty boxes to on their next visit. It's not rocket surgery. We just seem to be surrounded by morons. While I understand this idea, corporations will continue to use the cheapest, most convenient methods, until it becomes less profitable. If we don't make a point to reduce on our side, and continue supporting companies that don't, we'll never make any changes. And 1,000 people trying their hardest is ruined the second one of them goes on a cruise. And who buys the products and services produced by those large corporations? Who voted in those governments? Could it be Average Joe? Sure, government and business is to blame. But criticizing corporations is a waste of time. When you talk about corporate footprint and individual footprint, most of that is overlap. Consumers are paying corporations to have big footprints. Personally, I think it is a little ridiculous to expect corporations to solve the problem. Shareholders may kick those in charge out if they prioritize ethics. Government should be doing as much as possible. Yeah, it would be helpful if our government wasn't totally idiotic on this, but they are. I see a shift in gearheads as of late. Partly because electric cars are very cool and partly because we know that tailpipe emissions are one of the largest contributors to poor air quality in any area where a lot of people congregate. Lately it has become, electric vehicles for most, ICE for enthusiasts classic cars. If people actually started buying a lot of electric cars, and they are, then the industry will change. Partly there is strict regulation in Europe and it is easier to build one car that is compliant with the strictest rules than it is to have radically different specs for each car depending on the market. So companies are incentivized by policy. However, the Tesla effect has caused the electric car to be cool to the well-heeled, the ones that set the cultural standards and who can afford to subsidize the production of less expensive models. So the average Joe has a role to play. Buy the F-150 with the V6 instead of the V8, the V6 is excellent and less polluting. Buy a Tesla or some competitor if you have the money and you are realistic about your driving needs. The biggest role the average Joe has to play is to vote for candidates who will make some level of meaningful change that will impact this issue. Big corporations are made up of average Joes, making products they think average Joes want. Exactly. The amount of waste I get rid of compared to what corporations do is monumental. I'd rather they put money towards the problem rather than commercials for us to shrug about. Disappointing fact, Keep America Beautiful was founded by soft drink and beer companies. They coined the term litterbug. The object was to convince individuals that pollution was their fault, not industrial sources. Keep America Beautiful has lobbied against laws requiring deposits on recyclable containers. Plastic straws are an infinitesimal part of the problem. It is not that industry is not doing their part, they are actively working against it, at most engaging in greenwashing efforts which are primarily marketing ploys.